We, gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart.
Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago.
This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown.
How could it be otherwise? The peoples possessed a land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood.
Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alienated from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for our future.
These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country.
We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination.
We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history.
In 1967, we were counted.
In 2017, we seek to be heard.
We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart is an invitation to the Australian people from First Nation Australians. It invites all Australians to walk with First Nations peoples in a movement for a better future. It asks us to support a First Nations voice in the Constitution. This simply means the right to give advice on laws that affect First Nations peoples. This First Nations voice needs to be built into the Constitution, so it can only be changed by you, the Australian people, not the whim of government. From Australia's heart to yours, let's support this constitutional change and begin our journey to a better Australia.
So why are First Nations peoples so insistent that the voice needs to be enshrined in the Constitution? Quick history lesson. Back in 1973, Gough Whitlam established the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee until Malcolm Fraser got rid of that. And he replaced it with the National Aboriginal Conference until Bob Hawke got rid of that. And then there was nothing. And then Bob Hawke set up the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission until John Howard got rid of that. And then there was nothing. And then in 2011, the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples met for the first time until that was defunded and then finally gotten rid of by the Morrison government. In 2017, the Uluru Statement from the Heart was released. This took years of consultation and conversation amongst First Nations peoples, and in it they asked for a voice to be enshrined in the Constitution. Why? Because, unlike all those other laws, the Constitution can't be changed by the government. This can only be changed by a referendum. That's a vote of all Australians. So, what are we being asked to vote on in the upcoming referendum? Well, we're being asked to vote on whether to include the concept of a voice to Parliament in the Constitution. So a body to provide advice to the government on issues relating to First Nations peoples from the perspective of First Nations peoples. That's it. From there, how the voice works, so the functions and powers and composition and procedures, well, that will go into law, right? So those things can be changed along the way. But what can't be changed is the Constitution. And that means there will always have to be a voice. While it can change, it can't be taken away. And I reckon that's a good thing.
What essentially is being asked?
That First Nations have a say in the laws and policies that impact upon them. Now, when they have that say, it doesn't bind the Parliament. The Parliament doesn't have to go along with what it is that First Nations are saying. But the issue is that we're at the table when those laws and policies are made and when those decisions are made. That's the amendment. The amendment is for the Parliament to set up a First Nations voice, and that the Parliament is tasked with the job of supervising what that looks like. So they will pass it in legislation at a later point. I think most Australians can see that Closing the Gap, for example, and all of the other many attempts we've had to address and mitigate disadvantage hasn't worked. And one of the reasons for that is there's so few Indigenous people putting input into that. You know, a lot of what is done in our communities is controlled by an agency in Canberra. And how would they know how our people live in communities? How would they know what decisions to make on behalf of our communities? And well, they don't. And we can see that manifested in just the ongoing disadvantage, whether it's justice measures, health measures, education measures. We are not at the table, our voice is not at the table, and even if some are, they're not listening.
To change the system, we've got to be part of the system. And for some of our mob, they don't want to be part of the system, and that's up to them. Some of our mob don't want to vote in this referendum, and they don't want a voice to Parliament, and that's their choice. But we all must remember that we have been forced into this colonial system, whether we like it or not. Yes, we want our land back. Yes, we want treaty. But if history tells our mob anything, through broken promises, we're left with nothing and we're left voiceless. The voice will not be government handpicked. The details of this has already been released. The voice will be decided by us in our own communities. The voice has never stated that it's going to fix all our problems. The voice means that we will be able to be at the table on laws and policies that affect us in our communities. The voice doesn't cede our sovereignty. The 1967 referendum didn't cede our sovereignty. The Mabo decision didn't cede our sovereignty. The only people that can cede our sovereignty is us, and we are not ceding it. I'm choosing to participate in the referendum later this year because I believe the voice will bring change. I believe the voice will bring hope. It'll bring us to the table. Vote yes. Hey, debunking some of the statements that people are making why they're voting no. Statement 1. The voice will divide our country. Well, unfortunately, our country has actually been divided for probably around 230 years. Not sure if you mob know, but there have been certain laws that were created in our country that actually created great division. Those laws literally only affected one part of our country, Aboriginal people. Segregation laws, laws around whether we could marry, laws around who would look after our children, laws around being taken off country. Feel free to fact check any of this because Google will clarify all. So when people bring the argument that the voice to Parliament will divide our country, I encourage you to look into our shared history and look into the divisive laws that have already divided our country. These past laws have brought great suffering to First Nations people, and the horrific statistics that you read about every day that are happening in our community are the ongoing effect of these past laws. The voice will not divide us, it will bring us together. Number 2 statement, the change in the Constitution means that First Nations people will take your land, or that there's a conspiracy that we are going to forge a takeover of your land. No. Unfortunately for us mob, the past policies and laws that I spoke about literally stripped us of any power of being able to take over land. Even in native title, pastoral leases and mining companies literally have more power than us mob. They probably have more power than a lot of you too. Statement 3. A First Nations voice is racist. To who? We're 3% of the population. You mob are the majority. I've just spoken about some of the most racist laws in our shared history. The voice isn't racist. The voice is about recognising the first peoples of our country. The voice is about bringing those voices to the table. Ask yourself, what is it that you will lose if a First Nations voice is enshrined in our Constitution? Part of the reason why there's so much misinformation out there is because our country has never done truth-telling. Voice, treaty, truth is what we're asking, because we believe it will bring solutions, justice and healing. What is wrong with that?
I got a story to tell you. It's a good one. It's about how these people, the first people, got a voice.
60,000 years they've been speaking.
Had 363 languages.
But no voice. No say on matters which affected them. It wasn't right.
So, me and your granddad.
Me and your mum.
The whole nation did something about it. People called their friends and families. People talked about it on the streets, talked about it at work, on the field. Everybody made a song and dance about it.
Everyone walked side by side.
And that's how we changed this country for the better. How we made history.
Is that story true?
It could be.
Authorised by the Uluru Dialogue Sydney.